Okay, we going? Awesome. So welcome everybody. It's nice to see everybody here. I'm Alice.
Hi, Alice.
Thank you. Now I feel better. I thought it would be fun maybe to do a workshop on how to work the steps in Al-Anon using the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's kind of been my experience, which isn't necessarily the typical Al-Anon experience, but I think whatever familiarity we can have with the big book of AA is good for anyone that's in a 12-step program. So welcome everybody. I'm glad you're. I'm going to tell you guys just a little bit about my story. I'm going to keep that part pretty brief. And then the goal tonight is to talk about step one and what step one looks like in the big book and in the AA 12 by 12. And then hopefully we'll leave about 10 or 15 minutes for open discussion where you can share your own experience, ask questions, or stand up and sing to the group. I would applaud anybody that chose to do that. I've been in Al-Anon for just over 20 years. I joined in 1997. The Saturday morning group here at Edit is my home group, so I've been coming to that group for 20 plus years. 20 plus years ago, my life looked pretty grim. I was really in trouble. I weighed almost 300 pounds. I was on antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, major meds for chronic, what my doctor called chronic, untreatable, incurable migraines. I woke up crying and went to bed crying. It was bad. Things were bad for me. I was living with active alcoholism, and I'd been living with it for a long time. My husband and I had 7 beautiful kids. 5 of them were still at home. They were not doing well either. Alcoholism really is a family disease, and it really does affect everyone in the family. 2 of my sons at that time were teenagers. I started referring to them as the little felons because they were, the Golden Police knew me by name. Things were really bad for my family. And on one sunny Saturday, I had some friends over with their kids, and our kids were playing, and we were hanging out in the living room, and I heard a gunshot in my garage. And I thought, that's that. I thought my husband had killed himself. And it was his truck. He was working on it, and it backfired. But that broke something in me. To think that that's where my thought went is, on a sunny Saturday with the house full of kids and company, he's killed himself in the garage. And so at that point in time, I was kind of done with alcoholism. I'd been coming to Al-Anon for about a year, and because of the program, I had just enough courage to say, we're done. This is over. Because I knew that I was responsible to save my life and my children's lives, and I'd been so focused on trying to save my husband. One other thing, I had called my sister at one point in time. This is my sister right here. And we were talking about what was going on, and I said, I'm so afraid he's going to die. And she said, I'm afraid you're going to die. Because alcoholism kills everybody. It's an indiscriminate killer. So on that day, I set a boundary about alcohol, and I meant it. I recommend nobody do that unless they really, 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 really mean it. You can't say, now this is going to happen and then this doesn't happen, because it just digs everybody in the hole deeper, but I did mean it. At that time, I had 5 dependent children. I had $300 in the bank. I did not have a job. My car was 22 years old. My kids called it Satan's chariot because it stopped running randomly in bad places. It would just turn itself off. It's a really scary car to drive around in. The door on the very back of it, you know those great big station wagons? The door on the back was broke, so you couldn't open the car that way or the door came off. Passenger side door in the front was broke, so if I went somewhere with my husband, I'd just roll down the window and climb out the window when we got where we were going. Things were weird at my house, but I set this boundary with my husband, And I meant it. And the day came where the boundary was there, and he blew me off, and I walked out the door. We were 3 months behind on everything. Public service, it was called then, not Excel. The house, I had $300 and 6 dependents, including myself. And I said, we're done. And I was willing. I did not know what was going to happen. I really didn't. I thought I'd probably end up living in my parents' basement. And I didn't care at that point, because I was going to do whatever it took to save my life and to try to make my kids' life better. And that was a turning point for my qualifier, who I went out the door, and unbeknownst to me, he went down on his knees. And I had written a list earlier in the day of everything I would need to see him do to maybe give it a second chance, and it was a long list. So he called me up. He knew where I was. I came back home, and it was as if he'd seen the list. He said, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this, I will never drink again. And he hasn't. He's been sober since that day.
Wow.
That doesn't always happen, as we all know, right? That does not always happen. But it is part of my story, and I'm really grateful for it. I was scared of everything. When I came to Al-Anon and I found out I'd have to say my name out loud 3 times, the first 3 meetings I attended, I almost didn't come back, because I was afraid to say my name out loud in a group of people. I'm cured, apparently. But I was so afraid. And yet, when I sat in those meetings and I listened, I could tell that the people in my Al-Anon group had a solution that I did not have. And at the time, I belonged to a very, very, very strict fundamental Christian religion that did not allow outside help. It was against the rules. In fact, you could get kicked out for doing that. And at that point in time, I said, I don't care. I've got to have something. So, working the 12 steps, I say it saved my life, and then it transformed it. And I'm so grateful for what the steps have done for me. It came time soon after that to leave that church, because the church wasn't working for me anymore, but you weren't allowed to leave. And if you left, you were shunned and condemned forever. Like, you and your kids, right? So I was kind of up against the wall on that one. How do I get out of this church that I know isn't working for me, and I know it's not good for me, but I'm too scared to leave? And at that time, I met a man in AA who said to me these magic words. This is what he said. He says I misquote him, but well, whatever. He said, I can show you a process, Alice, where you can figure out if you're in that church really because of love of God, love of mankind, or because of fear. And he said, I think if you can see clearly what that looks like for you, you'll know what to do. And I was like, what? I never knew what to do, very rarely, okay? So he showed me the process. He took me through step 1, 2, and 3 real quickly, just real quick, right there on the spot. And then he showed me how to do a 4-step inventory. Hi, Ann.
Sorry.
And we did it big book style with the columns. And by God, he was right. When I was done with that inventory, what I could see was that I was a member of that church because I was afraid. And I was afraid to leave. And I had a fear-based God. And it was hurting me. And it was not good for my family either. So that was my introduction into working the steps using the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll give you guys a minute. You want to come sit over here? Come on in. I should also say that I am videoing this in the hopes that it can be of use to other people down the road. So during the time that we speak, if you can use first names only, that would be good. And if you're sitting up here by me, you're going to be on the video. Congratulations. So I thought we'd launch right into a discussion of step 1. What does it say in step 1? You guys can say it with me. We admitted we're powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable, right? That's step 1. Interestingly, I find this so fascinating. In the 12 by 12, AA 12 by 12, it says this about step 1. Where are my notes? Page 68. it says on page 68, I think this is fascinating. And it's talking about step 6. How can we accept the entire implication of step 6? Why that is perfection. This sounds like a hard question, but practically speaking, it isn't. Only step 1, where we made the 100% admission we were powerless over alcohol, can be practiced with absolute perfection. Isn't that interesting? So that kind of highlights to me the importance of a thorough first step, because it is in the first step that we understand powerlessness and we understand the unmanageability that powerlessness has created in our lives. And we have what I would call a come to Jesus moment with ourselves, right? Where we know that left to our own devices, it's not going to be okay. It's just not. And so when I'm working with sponsees, we take a minute with step 1, because I think it has to be done thoroughly. Step 1 is about acceptance. Step 1 is about surrender. If I am not properly surrendered, I will not be able to come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. I just won't be able to do it, right? So step 1 is important. So the AA Big Book on page 52 calls these 9 areas of unmanageability the bedevilments. Who loves the archaic patriarchal language in the AA Big Book? I have to say that took me aback for a while. I had a little bit of trouble with it. Nevertheless, this gives us sort of a map for step 1, right? It gives us some things to think about in connection with what are the things we are powerless over, and that powerlessness is creating unmanageability in our lives. So the first thing that's listed is we were having trouble with personal relationships. When I showed up at Al-Anon, I was having trouble with personal relationships, right? I felt I was pretty dadgum sure that if the alcoholic quit drinking, all would be well. That's hilarious to me now. It's so not the truth, right? I was crosswise with my kids. I was in a church that was totally unmanageable. I had a lot of resentments toward the men that ran that church. I had a lot of resentments toward my mom, my poor mom. I wrote about 3 books on her, I think, in the inventory process. We had a complicated relationship, me and my mom. God bless her, she's transitioned now. But when I talk to people about having trouble with personal relationships, I say, who are the primary players, right? So who are you in love with or married to? Who do you work for or work with, right? Do you love those people unconditionally? How about your kids, your grandkids, or your extended family? If you're in any kind of a community group, how do your relationships look there? And here's kind of my speech about relationships. They're supposed to be based on unconditional love. What does unconditional love mean? No hooks, man. No hooks. You get to be exactly who you are with me, and I love you. I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to upgrade you. I'm not trying to polish you. I'm not trying to make you behave better, right? I love you unconditionally. And so in my relationships, if that's not what's happening, then that means I need to look at that. Everybody should have deal breakers, right? So
Should have what?
deal breakers. So if you're in relationship, it's okay to have deal breakers. That should be a short list, right? Those are the things that in a love relationship you will not tolerate. For me, it got to the point where I stopped trying to prove my husband was an alcoholic, and I came to understand that his drinking made me uncomfortable, and that was enough. I didn't have to prove a thing. I didn't have to write the treatise on why we could prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was an alcoholic, right? All I had to know was the level of his drinking did not work for me, right? So everybody should have deal breakers in personal relationships. It should be a short list. If you're in relationship with someone and what's going on is not a deal breaker, then it's your responsibility as a human being to figure out what the heck to do about it, right? Instead of trying to push the other person around, unconditional love kind of sits with what's going on. And if it's not a deal breaker, I look to myself. What can I change? What can I do? What needs to be different inside me to make this relationship better? Because when I started changing me, and I am not kidding you, I think my sister's the only person in the room who knew me 20 years ago. But it's hilarious. I'm not the same person. I'm just not. Because I changed me using the steps in a power greater than myself. That's where the power is, right? We are not powerful over other people. We work the steps, and eventually we get knowledge of God's will and the power to carry that out. And that's where the power is. It's never going to be in changing others. So personal relationships, look at the key players. Couldn't control our emotional nature. I said just a minute ago, I went to sleep crying and woke up crying. That's the truth. I did. I mean, my emotional nature I was a basket case. I was so not okay. So when I think of emotional nature, the word that I'm aiming for that comes up, probably people in this room know what word I'm thinking of. It's stability, right? Is our emotional nature stable? Can we deal with life's ups and downs with some equanimity? Do we have faith even when we don't get our way that things are going to work out and that we'll be shown what to do and that we'll understand what to do, right? So having trouble, couldn't control our emotional nature. Prey to misery. Misery is a strong word, isn't it? Prey to misery, right? Misery's got us, right? We're miserable. Joy, non-existent. Happiness, fleeting, if at all. After I worked the steps, I got out of that church. I started making some changes. I did all kinds of wild stuff. It was so much fun. At the time I had a little cleaning business and I cleaned up in Genesee. And one day I was just driving around from job to job and I had this feeling I couldn't figure out what it was, and it was joy. I'm like, yay! It happened, right? And now, people at work say, are you always happy? And I'm like, most of the time. Most of the time I'm happy, yeah. And I think that's the way life's supposed to be, right? So 85% of the time we're happy, and 15% of the time we have to have a tooth pulled, or our dog dies, or somebody gets sick, right? And life is nobody's exempt, right? We're a bag of skin filled with liquid, bones, and organs walking around on a dangerous planet, right? We've got DNA, people get sick. Things happen to human beings and nobody's exempt from that, right? Other than that, are you happy? Or are you prey to misery? Prey to depression, that overwhelming sadness, right? That can I was prey to depression. I was on some medicine for it that kept me sort of at the edge of the pit instead of in the pit. But I'm not on any of that medicine anymore because I don't need it. Now, that doesn't work for everybody. Everybody's got DNA, everybody's got chemistry, whatever. I'm not saying quit taking your pills. In fact, I will say strongly, don't quit taking your pills. But the work and the steps changed that stuff for me. Couldn't make a living. We have a tradition that supports financial stability too. Who knows what it is?
7.
Yeah. What's the 7th tradition?
Self-supporting.
Fully self-supporting through our own contributions. Now, I'm not here to tell you what kind of deals about money to make in your family. People get to work that stuff out. But one of the things I brought to my sponsor is the idea that my husband didn't make enough money. And you wouldn't believe what that cruel man said to me. He said, "There's lots of money in the world, Alice. If you want some, go get it." And I was like, what? That wasn't the deal we made, right? I was going to be an artist and, whatever. Hang out. So I went and got a job. It wasn't a very good job. But I've worked myself up into a manager's position at that job. When I took that job, I didn't believe in computers. I thought they'd go away if I waited long enough. Why did I not believe in computers? Because I didn't know how to use them, and I was intimidated and afraid. And I didn't want to learn, because I never tried anything if I didn't already know how to do it. I just didn't do it, right? So I went and got myself a job. I now make lots of money. There's lots of money in the world. If you want some, go get it. It's out there. Go figure it out. My husband and I, we bought our first house about a year ago, and I couldn't believe it. I've wanted to buy a house since I was in my 20s. I haven't been in my 20s for a minute. Nevertheless, right? And I looked and waited and made offers and waited and looked and waited and made offers and waited and didn't know what was going to happen and kept turning it over. And finally, this man that was a friend of mine wanted us to buy his house. He didn't want to put it on the market. He's an engineer and a scientist and extremely anxious and introverted. When we turned the key on that house, we had $75,000 in equity because he wanted us to buy it. And he knew what my budget was. That's a God solution, right? There's a God solution right there. And I got to buy a house, which has just tickled me ever since. I call it the beautiful house. It's not allowed to be dirty, just so you know. If you come over, don't mess up my house. Feeling of uselessness, right? 20 years ago, I was so dang self-obsessed and in my own stuff that I was dying. Literally, right? I wasn't useful. I was almost agoraphobic. I went to church. I went to church a lot. I tell people, no thanks, I'm all caught up. In this lifetime, I will never have to go into a church again because I'm caught up on that one. You guys go, I'm fine. But that feeling of uselessness, right? Not helpful. Not helpful to others. Not able to be, right? So scared, so in my stuff, so lacking faith and hope that I was not useful to the world. And I have a manifesto, because why wouldn't you have a manifesto if you could? And it's this: God is love. If it's not love, it's not from God. It is the universe trying to teach you something, right? God is love, right? We are here to heal and to help others heal, right? That's kind of it. That's it. So when I become well, when I finally have something to offer to the world, it's imperative. It's imperative that I share that with others. In the AA 12 by 12, on step 12, where we carry the message, it says you must not miss this. Why?
Must not?
You must not miss this, step 12, carrying the message. Because God works with us, love works with us, we get better, we make other people better, right? That's what we're here to do. So feeling of uselessness, full of fear. Yeah, an evil and corroding thread that was woven throughout my entire life, and I didn't even know it. Perhaps I should have. There was a lot of stuff going on with me that was saying, oh, sweetie, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Full of fear. It's either fear or it's love. It's one or the other. Whatever's going on, when you boil it down, it's either fear or it's love. The 4-step inventory is how you figure that out. If you're not sure. Unhappy. Yeah. I was chronically unhappy. Okay? Could not really help others. Kind of similar to a feeling of uselessness. I mean, that feeling of uselessness, like I don't even want to make your bed, you know. Don't care about much of anything. Couldn't really help others. Yep, that's the 9th and the last of the bedevilments as they're spoken of in the big book of AA. When I first worked with my Al-Anon sponsor, before I started working with the guy in AA, she would say to me, "How do you feel?" And I'd be like, "I feel terrible." That was my answer. And she'd say, "Can you elaborate?" And I could not. I couldn't elaborate. I was that in the weeds, right? But over time, I've come to recognize that this list can be helpful if I'm trying to figure out what's going on in Alice's world and what might need to be done about it. Okay? So that's the 9 bedevilments on page 52 of the big book. Interestingly, there's another lovely comment right across the page from the bedevilments. The bedevilments are 52, and on page 53. Now, this is going to talk about alcoholics. Just substitute Al-Anon when you hear alcoholics. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? So I don't have a religion at this point in time in my life. To me, I don't really care what people's religious beliefs are. The big book tells us that we're quick to find the good in churches, right? Many people have churches, synagogues, whatever that they go to. But to have an understanding of what God is very important. Like, to me, God is love. So the energy of love is what God is. And it's that energy that runs the universe. Which 20 years ago, if someone had said that to me, I might have disagreed strongly. But love is the energy that runs the universe. So when people come together and they want to be well, and they engage a process that works, love steps in and love pushes with them, right? When I decided, after I'd gone to maybe 10 Al-Anon meetings, and again, I was breaking all the rules, the people in my family were mad, the people in my church did not know what I was doing because it was against the rules. You know, when I decided to do that, and I heard that the people in that room had a solution that I did not have, I decided to work all 12 of the steps before I quit. I decided, and that was, 20 plus years ago. Because once I worked the steps and I tapped into that power, you guys, that power, the power of love, the power of God, whatever you want to call it. It can be the power of the group. It can be the power of the steps. It can be the power of the principles underneath the steps, right? Whatever it is, when we tap into that and we are willing to move forward, the universe pushes with us. And I am living proof of that, my friends. I'm living proof of it. I shouldn't be here, really. It was just too much for me. And I'm smart, and I'm capable, because I'm an Al-Anon. And almost everything I did about active alcoholism made it worse. It made it worse. And I've had to deal with the fallout from that, right, in my family. Had those beautiful 7 kids. It's been an act of love and patience to work with them around the way they grew up. And their resentments toward, guess who? The alcoholic? Not so much. Me. Because I was the one that was in their face, and I was the one that was not well, and I was the one that was running the show. And they suffered at my hands. And I was a good mom, I was. But there's been aftermath with that, right? So we show up here and we want to do this work of healing. And we had whatever. When I came here, I was 44. I turned 44 that September. I was 44. And so I had all those years, right, of being sick. And so the steps are not magic. They're not. When people say they don't understand how the steps work, it irritates me a little bit. Because I think I do. I could be wrong, I guess. That would be funny. Don't come next week. I think they work because they're based on spiritual principles that are inviolable, right? Like love is a principle. It's the strongest thing on the planet. It's stronger than anything else you can put next to it. And when you engage that, watch out, right? Watch out. And love can be kittens and puppies and whatever, ribbons, or it can be more like a fire, right? Like doing this work in the steps and making the changes I had to make in my life to make my life work. It felt more like Armageddon and less like skipping through the forest with the birds, right? But the principles in the steps, you can't argue with them, right? They're there and they work. The principles in the first step, honesty and surrender. If you can learn to tell the truth about what's happening and what's your part and what it really looks like, that's a spiritual principle that's going to rock your world. Acceptance, radical acceptance, where we get real with what's going on and we understand what's our job and what's not. And we quit trying to push people around. I have a member of my family that's very ill. She's got it all. She's a drug addict, an alcoholic. She's got MS. She may, at this point, she probably has some mental difficulties, and she's homeless. You know, there's not a thing I can do for her. In fact, when I get involved with her, she gets sicker, and so do I. It's the craziest thing, you guys. So that radical acceptance, like God has a plan. I'm not in charge of it. I need to pay attention to what's going on here with me, and I need to let other people have their lives even if I vehemently disagree with what they're doing and even if my heart is breaking. Yep. There is a God moment for me.
Just to share, I had a friend who once told me, you know how you get radical acceptance is through radical faith.
Yeah. It was so good for me to not have to run the show anymore. I'm not kidding you. It was a good thing. So I have a couple of poems to read you guys. So one of the things that happened to me when I started working steps is I decided I was a writer and I wanted to go to school and figure out how to write. I was way too scared to do it, as usual. But I managed, right? So I showed up at Metro State University on the last day of signing up for classes, and I hadn't registered or applied or anything. And somehow I got into this creative writing class anyway. There is a God. That was grace, though. He'd expect me to do that different now. Right? But that's how that went that day. And a lot of the poetry that I wrote has to do with the work I've done in the 12 steps and the healing that's taken place in me. So this is the poem that I picked for you guys about step 1. And it's called The Angle of Repose, or How to Work a 12-Step Program. An engineering term, the angle of repose, a spot on a slope where dirt quits tumbling. I knew about tumbling, though I first read the title as The Angel of Repose, hoping for divine intervention, a halo or a wing to grab onto, something to slow my descent. What I got instead, a pile of rubble to dig through, make level, a place to enjoy the view. I didn't realize that the work, the shoveling, sitting exhausted, continued measuring, bar set for plumb, would help me stand, claim my own soil, the untilled promise of myself. And then I've got one more for you. This is by my favorite poet, Mary Oliver. Do you guys know Mary Oliver? Ann does. Do you know Mary Oliver? Mary Oliver's my favorite poet, and she came to the Tattered Cover several years ago, and I got to meet her. And I scared her a little bit, I think. Because I stood in line, you know, standing in line. And I was so overcome by the time I got in front of her that I just said, "I love you so much." And she was like, "Okay." Then I said, "Will you sign my books?" She did. I have all of them. She was very patient. So I read this poem right before I got into Al-Anon, and the first line of it is such a shock to me. And I remember reading this and going, oh, imagine if that were true. It's called Wild Geese.
Oh.
You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. So, I intended to talk for 45 minutes, not bad. 40. I thought it would be fun, so because this isn't a meeting, we don't have to follow all the meeting rules. Yay! Who's a rebel at heart? Everybody, probably, yeah. So I thought I'd give you some musical references too. As I was doing step work early in my recovery, I would hear songs that it would feel like it would just open my heart, right? When my sponsor that I still work with today started working with me, he said, "You are one of the most offended people I have ever met in my life." And I was like, well, rats. So anything that gave me that feeling, you know, of not shutting down and closing off, of not building walls of protection, of not hiding. Hiding was one of my favorite things. I was so good at hiding that I could go places where people would see me and have no memory that I was there. Like I was a hidden, silenced, sad, frightened, defended person. So when I found music that helped open my heart and kind of open me up to the world, it was a big deal to me. And so every week I'm going to tell you about some music I think you should listen to based on the step that we're currently discussing. So on step 1, I think you should try Carrie Newcomer. She's got a song called Hold On. And then she's also got a song called Bare to the Bone. You can YouTube it or Spotify it or Papa Google it or do whatever you want to do. Van Morrison has a song called Into the Mystery. Not Into the Mystic. That's really a famous song, but he's got one called Into the Mystery. Let go into the mystery. Let yourself go. You've got to open up your heart. That's all I know. That's the beginning of it, right? So Van Morrison, when I went to school, I took all the upper level creative writing courses. I got a lot of poetry published. I got in a workshop group with my teachers. It was fabulous. It was the coolest thing ever. And I actually wrote a paper on Van Morrison. He's my guy. If you want more Van Morrison and you want to know what CD I would recommend, try Poetic Champions Compose or Hymns to the Poetic Champions Compose or Hymns to the Silence. Both really good CDs. And then, of course, the Beatles' Help. Help? I need somebody. Help, not just anybody. Help. I need someone, right? I need someone. So that's for grins. The poetry I read are these poems right here. I'm also going to suggest that I love Al-Anon literature. This workshop is not happening because I don't like Al-Anon literature. I love Al-Anon literature, love it. But so many Al-Anons are not familiar with sort of the mothership. The mothership is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 by 12 by alcohol. That's Mecca, friends. And if you're in a 12-step program, you should have a working knowledge of that literature. It will skyrocket your recovery if you did. Someone told me to go to open AA meetings when I was new in Al-Anon, and thank God, because by that time I was like, people were saying, go do this. I'm like, I'm on it. I'm on it. Like, the we don't give advice thing in Al-Anon applies in meetings. I don't believe in crosstalk. I don't believe in gossip. Meetings are meetings, and we have to be very careful about that. If you work with me and I'm your sponsor, am I going to tell you what to do? I am. Oh.
Sorry.
That was an appropriate guffaw. I am. Why? Because you're scared and you're a mess. And you don't know what to do. You don't, right? I didn't know what to do. And when my sponsor started bossing me around and I started doing what he told me to do, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. The best thing that could have happened to me is just follow directions, right? That Van Morrison song goes on to say, the one into the mystery, trust what I say and do what you're told. Yeah. And all your mistakes will turn to gold. Right? Let go into the mystery. Let yourself go. So I'm bossy. You might want to remember that. Read the big book of AA. The first 164 pages are the meat of this book. You will read things that blow your mind in this book if you can get over the patriarchal antique language, which I did. I got over myself, right? This is a wonderful, wonderful book, and it will really help your recovery. So this is kind of the format we're going to follow. I am videotaping this in the hopes that it might be useful down the road to other people. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. It just felt like the right thing to do. So as you share, use your first name only, please. And if you like the format, this is what we're going to do. Every week we're going to talk about a step. I'll tell you stories. I'll give you music to listen to. Hopefully it'll be somewhat entertaining, not too dry. And then we'll take the last 15 minutes for sharing. So we're at the last 15 minutes.
I just have a quick question. The second Van Morrison album, what was that? Again,
It's
I have it at home.
Hymns
somewhere.
to the Silence.
That's right.
Yeah. Carrie Newcomers, she's worth listening to the whole album too. If you find her, she sings about spiritual growth. That's what she sings about. It's the coolest thing ever.
Those both on the same CD.
They're on one of her collection CDs together. I know because I looked them up. I got on Spotify today and dug around a little bit. She's lovely. So that's what I've got for you guys. Thanks for coming. Any questions, observations, experiences, things you want to talk about for the last 15 minutes? Anybody got good step one experience?
I'm Mary.
Hi, Mary.
I just, you mentioned the deal breaker. I'm not clear on what
Okay.
you're
Well, Al-Anons often are in relationships with people that are compromised, right? They're sick.
Right.
So they're currently drinking or using. They may be sober, but not okay. They could be abusive, emotionally unavailable, whatever. Every person, man or woman, should decide what their deal breakers are, right? So a deal breaker would be, I can't live with this. I can't live with this. It's hurting me. It's hurting me. Alcohol, I like to say, because it's true, alcoholism almost killed me, and I didn't drink. It almost killed me. I had one foot out the door. When my kids were little, I had Excel Energy come to the house to look at the furnace before winter, because that was the service they provided. And I was pregnant with my 7th child at the time. And they found that the carbon monoxide outtake vent was rusted almost all the way through. So they red tagged the furnace and turned it off and said, don't turn it back on till it's fixed. And I wish they hadn't found it. That was my thought. Because if we could all just die. So that was my idea of a solution. And to me, that's what happens when you don't have a deal breaker, right? And you stay trying to make things better that you can't make better, right? And it's very dangerous. So it's okay to get some work under the steps under your belt before you decide what to do. I had to do that. It took me about 1.5 years in Al-Anon before I knew what to do. But we should all have deal breakers. It should be a short list, not a long list. Like, makes too much noise when eating cereal? Maybe not, right? Maybe that shouldn't be a deal breaker. Go eat your breakfast somewhere else, right? But there should be some deal breakers, right? And I would call those the things that you can't live with because you just can't. You really can't. Can't live with it. Anybody else got anything about step 1 that they'd like to say?
My name is Candy.
Hi, Candy.
Hi. So I'm recently, 2 years shy out of a 15-year relationship with an alcoholic. I left because it was a deal breaker. And I'm finding that lately, the people that I'm presented with in my life have that same problem. Like my sister, I'm recently finding it's like becoming very apparent to me. I was over at her house on Saturday, and I had to leave because it was a deal breaker. And I don't know what's happening. I don't know. I feel like the universe is being like saying like, "Hey, look at this, look at that."
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah. So
Do you have a sponsor?
I don't.
Get a sponsor and start working steps.
Okay.
Because, like, that story is perfect. So, I thought about having business cards made for me that had my name on it, and then it would say in the back, "I'm attracted to you. You're an alcoholic. You might want to just go put yourself in program somewhere, because I'm attracted to you. You're an alcoholic." It's weird. I don't get it.
I don't
I
either.
do think, so this is just me, okay? This is not program, this is me. But I think things run in families. And I think healing takes place in families. And so in my family that I grew up in, there was alcoholism on both my parents' side. My dad's brother Bud died at 40 of alcoholism. One of his other brothers set his house on fire. Like, alcoholism in my father's family. My dad was not an alcoholic. Alcoholism in my mother's family, and some abuse too. And like, for me, this is just me, right? I believe that we choose to come here to heal things. And I believe whenever I was with God last, I said, yeah, I want to work on that stuff because it's killing people. It's hurting them so bad. And so when we come here and we engage some kind of a process, whether it's 12 steps or Buddhism, right, that has real power to it, and we bring that power to the stuff and we heal the stuff, then our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, it's not around anymore. Like my sponsor said to me once, I hope your grandkids are like, what's alcoholism? What's that? You know? Because I think that love's power is utterly transformative, right? So when you bring something that's an illness, that's a sickness, that's hurting people, that's weighing people down, and you really bring it to love, and you're not affected by it. I'm not affected by it anymore. I had some pretty funky things happen to me when I was a kid, and it's like it didn't happen, really. I'm not affected by it. So it doesn't live in me anymore. And if it doesn't live in me anymore, then when I get real close to you, right, you're not going to be affected by it because it's gone. My kids are not going to be affected by it because it's gone. My grandkids have it the easiest because I've been well for a long time. And they have a grandma that loves them unconditionally. Yay! Hopefully that's good for my kids to see, because they did not have a mother that was capable of unconditional love. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the other thing I want to say about that, Candy, is when I say yes, when I'm like, all right, I'm done, I'm gonna do whatever it takes till this is different and better, and I stay with that. It always works. I heard that Bill W. was interviewed once, and he was asked if there's anything he'd change in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that he wrote. And he said he'd change one word from rarely have we seen it fail to never have we seen it fail. Never have we seen it fail. You embrace this process. You chase your recovery like you mean it. Like for me, I asked 3 women to sponsor me, and they said no. And in the early meetings that I was at, I cried through the whole meeting, like sobbed noisily, hysterically. That's what I did. Believe it or not, it bothered some people. I don't know why. People would talk to me about it. So had I had some recovery under my belt, I might not have wanted to work with me either. But, you know, somebody finally said yes. And I have embraced this process, and it has changed everything. Everything in my life. It's the craziest thing ever.
I have a funny.
We do teach people how to treat us. We do. You know, what we carry inside of us, you know, it radiates. It radiates. And one of the other things that I love about my sponsor is I felt so unsafe in the world. I just felt so unsafe. And he really taught me that safety is inside me. Like safety is inside me. I carry it with me, right? I carry it with me. So, anybody else want to say anything?
I was just going to say too, I'm Nancy, but the one thing about anybody that's new and afraid to work through the steps and you can't find a sponsor, don't give up. Keep trying. There's somebody out there that's going to help you. So I had gone through that, and one time I picked somebody that didn't have as much program as I had, and I was working through adult children issues at the time, and so happened that she didn't want to sponsor me. She didn't think the sponsor that I had another sponsor I was working with, and that sponsor I ended up doing the inventory with that sponsor, and she said, I don't think it matters. at all. So, you know, and I was just looking for somebody, and I did a 1, 2, 3 waltz for quite a while until I worked through the steps. But, you know, I'm just glad that I hung in there. And I just encourage you to keep looking for somebody, you know, and sometimes they might be full and have already people they're working with, but they'll help you out if they can, or somebody will.
Well, that's my path now, so
Yeah.
I'll find someone.
Cool. Yeah, I have a friend in program who says, don't quit before the miracle happens. Don't quit before the miracle happens.
And just a real quick thing about a sponsor, you know, I asked a couple of people and they were both really busy, you know, and my feelings weren't hurt. I didn't take it personally. And the person I have now, I just think that God knows who you need to be with.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, the perfect person shows up when it's time.
Yeah, you can trust that.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Let's close with.